They told me the barn doors would stay closed to me, told me before they ever told my daughter she was getting married in it. That's the first thing you should know. Not the wedding, not the dress. The door. Closed on a 71-year-old man. A man who'd already paid for every board in it. They called it avoiding a scene. I called it Tuesday. $18,400 of my money, and they wanted me standing in a gravel lot. While a coordinator with a tablet checked her list. I didn't argue. I never do. I nodded. I said thank you. I walked back to my truck. Then I called a woman named Vera Nash, my lawyer for 19 years. I said 4 words to her, cancel all of it. And then, before 3 o'clock struck, I picked up the phone a second time. But before the phone call, there was a barn door and a folder in a locked drawer, waiting 2 years for a day exactly like that one. Let me take you back 3 months. My name is Russell Copeland. I am 71 years old. I did not raise my voice at any of it, not once, all the way through. I did not need to. I poured my first foundation slab in this county at 19, working for a man named Herb Talley. He paid me in cash. He taught me concrete doesn't lie to you. It just tells you the truth slower than people do. 52 years later, my name's still on a sign out on Sycamore Road. Copeland and Sons Construction. There was never a son, only a daughter, Callie. I never changed the sign. Marlene liked the sound of it, and some things you build once, you leave standing the way you built them. Marlene was my wife for 43 years. She's been gone 4 now. Cancer took her slow, the way it takes people you'd trade places with in a heartbeat. I buried her in the plot she picked herself, under a maple tree at Restland. I have not missed a Sunday visiting that stone since. She left a garden behind, planted with her own hands along our back fence. Peonies mostly. And a wedding dress, folded in a cedar chest in the spare room. She tailored it herself at 17, for a wedding of her own. One that never got a barn or a band, or anybody's blessing. She always said she'd save that dress for Callie. She never got to see her wear it. That's the kind of thing you carry, quiet, your whole life. Callie is 30 years old now. Soft where her mother was soft. Stubborn where I'm stubborn. About 8 months before all this, she came home for supper. Told me she was engaged. To a man named Preston Halloway. Good enough fellow. Sells insurance over in Waterloo. Drives a car nicer than his salary should allow. Laughs at things before he's sure they're funny. The way a man does when he's used to somebody else doing his deciding for him. I liked him fine. I did not like his mother. Diane Halloway is 64, a real estate broker with an office on the courthouse square. 2 commercial listings had sat dark for 14 months, and nobody outside her bank knew that yet. She has a way of talking about money like it's weather, something that just happens to a family, never something anybody has to actually produce. Her husband Gary goes along with whatever she says, the way some men do after 30 years of practice. Their son, my future son-in-law, borrows his mother's certainty. He doesn't have much of his own. The night Callie told us about the engagement, Diane hosted a dinner. That's where I first heard her call the wedding the family's gift to the kids. Back home, I had an invoice from the Kestrel barn sitting unopened on my own kitchen counter. A deposit already wired out of my account that morning. I said nothing. I just ate my chicken and watched Diane smile at her own sentence like she'd built something with it. That's the thing about a foundation. Nobody sees it. They just walk on the floor above it and assume the floor holds itself up. 3 weeks before the wedding, I drove out to the Kestrel barn for the vendor walkthrough. It's a renovated dairy barn on Route 9, 12 miles outside Cedar Falls. Plank floors, a new mezzanine built in over the old hayloft for extra seating. I hadn't been asked to come. I came anyway. My name was on the rental contract, whether anybody at that barn wanted to remember that or not. I walked the plank floor slow, the way I walk any floor, feeling for give under my boots. About halfway across under the new mezzanine, I felt it. A softness. A shift that shouldn't be there in wood that old. I found the site manager, a young guy named Petey, sawdust on his jeans. I told him. Flat, no drama in it. The north support beam was carrying too much load from that mezzanine. It needed a jack post before Saturday, or somebody was going to feel it give during the reception. He looked at me like I'd read his mind. Then he looked at the beam. Then he called his boss. Nobody asked me how I knew. 52 years of reading floors, that's how. I've spent my whole life learning what's load-bearing, and what only looks solid from where you're standing. That skill doesn't retire just because I did. While PT ran for his level, I signed a delivery slip on a clipboard by the door, out of habit. A truck backs in, somebody needs a signature. A stranger walking past glanced at it and assumed it was Diane's name on the line. Then did a double take reading mine instead. Russell Copeland. Every vendor contract for that wedding was written and paid in my name. The caterer, the florist, the barn rental itself, the string quartet, the open bar, every single one. Diane never checked. She assumed a quiet old man in a barn coat wouldn't read fine print. Wouldn't notice whose name went where. She was wrong about that. Same as she was wrong about the beam. I didn't correct anybody that day. I just got back in my truck and drove home. That night I opened the cedar chest in the spare room and looked at Marlene's dress again. The ivory gone soft cream with age. Found same place I always find it. The note she'd sewn into the lining herself. With her own careful stitches. Walk her, if you have to walk her alone. Just walk her. I read it every few months. I don't know why that particular night I read it 3 times. I had no idea yet what that note was going to end up meaning. I'd find out. The next Sunday, Callie came by the house alone, without Preston, sat at my kitchen table where her mother used to sit. Told me the Halloways wanted a smaller guest list. On my side. Nothing dramatic, she said. Just trim it a little. Keep things simple. Then quieter. Not quite meeting my eyes, she said. Just don't make it weird, Dad. 5 words. They landed harder than anything Diane Halloway had said to my face in 8 months of dinners. I told her I wouldn't make anything weird. I meant it. I have never once in my whole life made a scene out of anything that mattered to me. I just build. I just pay attention. 3 months later, standing outside a barn door I'd already paid for, that's exactly what I'd still be doing. Right up until the moment it stopped being enough. 2 weeks after that Sunday, Diane sent an email to the whole wedding party. The subject line read, Final Vision Board, our gift to Callie Preston. She'd attached photographs of a barn draped in string lights and white linen, a menu from a caterer out of Cedar Rapids, and a note at the bottom thanking our family for making the day possible. My name did not appear once in that email. Neither did the $18,400 already gone out of my account. $3,000 for the barn deposit, $4,200 for the caterer's retainer, $6,000 for the open bar package. The rest scattered across a florist, a quartet, and a rental company. Chairs nobody in that barn would ever think to ask who paid for. I didn't reply to the email. I forwarded it instead to Vera Nash, with one line on top, for the file. She'd been keeping a file on this wedding for 2 months by then, at my quiet request. Every invoice, every wire transfer, every contract with my signature on it. Organised the way she organises everything. Patient and exact. Vera had handled Marlene's estate when she passed. She'd handled the business's paperwork since before that. 19 years she'd sat across from me at that same desk. And in all 19, I don't believe I ever once raised my voice in her office either. There was never a reason to. She already knew what I meant before I finished saying it. A month before the wedding, I drove into Waterloo to see Walt Pruitt at First Cedar Bank. Walt had run my account since 1994, back when I was still paying off the loan on my first backhoe. He's retired twice and come back both times because a man like Walt doesn't know how to sit still any better than I do. I told him I wanted every wedding-related payment routed through a single account, separate from the business, so I could see the whole picture in one column instead of scattered across 4. He set it up in 20 minutes. Then, almost as an afterthought, he folded his hands on the desk, told me something. Diane Halloway's brokerage had applied for a personal loan the month before, $81,000 against her own house. He wasn't supposed to tell me that. Walt Pruitt has never once cared what he was supposed to do, only what was true and who needed to hear it. I sat with that number the whole drive home. $81,000. Against her own house. A woman who stood up at every dinner and called a barn wedding our gift to the kids. Carrying a debt that size in the dark. Quiet. Where nobody but a loan officer, and now an old concrete man, would ever see it. I understood something then I hadn't understood before. Diane Halloway wasn't performing generosity because she had money. She was performing it because she didn't. That performance was the only thing between her and the truth coming out, Coming out in front of people whose opinion she'd built her whole life around. Fear does strange things to people. I've watched it happen to men on job sites for 50 years. Guys who'd rather let a beam crack in silence than admit out loud they'd measured it wrong. Diane's fear just wore nicer shoes than theirs did. 3 weeks before the wedding, Callie called me in the evening, her voice smaller than usual. "Mom's dress," she said, meaning Marlene's dress. Diane had suggested gently at first that the venue's palette might clash. Sage green and cream, she said. Might not photograph well against ivory gone the colour of old parchment. She'd found a rental gown, a newer style, something that would match better. Callie hadn't said yes, she also hadn't said no. She'd called me instead, at 9 at night, asking a question she already knew the answer to, hoping I'd say it out loud so she wouldn't have to. I told her the truth. That dress had been waiting for her since before she could walk. Her mother tailored the neckline herself at 17 for a wedding that never came, and a Barnes colour palette did not get a vote in what her mother's daughter wore to be married in. Callie went quiet on the line for a long moment. Then she said, "I know, Dad. I just don't know how to tell Diane no." I told her she didn't have to tell Diane anything. I'd handle it. She asked me not to make it weird again, and I told her for the second time that I wouldn't. I made one phone call the next morning, to the Barnes coordinator directly, not to Diane, confirmed it in writing. The bride would be wearing a family heirloom gown, non-negotiable, and any further discussion of the wedding dress should come through me. I held the master vendor contract and the master calendar both. It was a small thing, a quiet thing. Nobody but the coordinator and I ever knew that call happened. But it was the first time in 8 months I'd used the fact of my own name on all those contracts for anything at all. It felt, I'll admit, like testing a beam before you trust your full weight on it. The following week, at a dinner Diane hosted to finalise seating, I overheard her on the phone in the kitchen. She thought nobody was listening. She was telling somebody, maybe her sister, maybe a friend, that Russell's gotten a little forgetful lately. Bless him. Calling the venue direct like that, thinking he's still running the show. I stood in that kitchen doorway 3 full seconds before she noticed me. She smiled the smile she always smiled. I smiled back. I said nothing. But I heard it, clear as a crack in a foundation you find with your own boot. She wasn't worried about my memory. She was testing a story, seeing how it sounded out loud. The story where the concrete man had gotten confused, gotten difficult, needed managing gently, out of the centre of his own daughter's wedding. I've heard that story before, not about me, about other men my age, other women, friends of mine who built things their whole lives, then watched somebody decide, conveniently, right around the time real money got involved, that they'd started losing their grip. I know exactly what that story sounds like in its early stages. Quiet, kind-voiced, concerned. I'd heard the first sentence of it in Diane Halloway's kitchen, and I understood, standing there, that I was going to need every piece of paper I'd ever signed. That night I went home and opened the cedar chest again, not for the note this time, for the dress itself. I ran my hand along the hem Marlene stitched by lamplight 40 some years ago, in a house that isn't standing anymore, for a wedding that never happened. And I thought about how a woman can build something beautiful and patient and true, wait her whole life to see it used, and never get the chance. I was not going to let anybody replace that dress to match a colour palette. Not while I still had breath in me. Not with a lawyer on retainer and my own name on every single contract in that barn. I closed the chest. I turned off the light. And for the first time since the engagement dinner 8 months back, I let myself feel something close to anger. Quiet anger. The kind that doesn't raise its voice. The kind that just starts making phone calls. 10 days before the wedding, I drove out to see Vera Nash. Her office is on the square, above the old hardware store. Same office where she'd read Marlene's will to me 4 years earlier. I told her what I'd overheard in Diane's kitchen. She didn't look surprised. Vera Nash does not startle easy. She'd seen this story play out twice before in her career, both times with an older client, both times with an in-law family circling money that wasn't theirs. She asked me one question. "Russell, when's the last time you had a doctor look you over?" I told her 6 weeks ago. Clean bill of health, same as every year. "Good," she said. "Get the letter. Get it dated. Get it notarized. Before this goes 1 inch further." I did that the next morning. My doctor is a woman named Priya Ose, and she'd treated me for 11 years. She wrote a letter, plain as anything. said I was of sound mind, sound memory, fully competent to manage my own affairs. She dated it. She signed it. Vera notarized a copy and put it in the file she'd been building since the first invoice came in. I didn't know yet exactly what that file would be used for. I only knew I was going to need it. The way you know a beam's about to give before it does. That same week, Callie stopped by unannounced, on her lunch break, still in her work clothes. She sat at my kitchen table looking tired in a way that had nothing to do with wedding planning. She told me Diane had been asking about me, gently, whether Dad's doing okay lately, whether I'd seemed a little off, whether somebody ought to keep an eye on his accounts just to be safe. You know how men his age can be. Callie hadn't said yes to any of it. She also hadn't defended me the way I might have hoped. She just relayed it, uncertain. Watching my face for a reaction I made sure not to give her. I told her I was fine. I told her the truth. I'd never felt sharper in my life, and that sharpness was exactly the problem for some people. She asked what I meant. I told her she'd understand soon enough. In the meantime, all she needed to know was that her father loved her. Nothing happening around this wedding was going to change that, no matter how it looked from the outside before it was over. She left without finishing her coffee. I sat at that table a long while after she'd gone, turning a spoon over in my hand, thinking about how a lie gets built the same way a bad foundation gets built, one shortcut at a time, each one small enough to excuse, until the day comes when the whole thing is standing on nothing but hope and bad concrete. A week before the wedding, I went back out to the Kestrel barn to check on the jack post repair. PD had done the work right, exactly as I'd specified. The mezzanine floor didn't give an inch when I walked it this time. He thanked me again for catching it. Said his boss had told him I'd probably save somebody a broken leg at the reception. I told him that was the whole job, catching the thing nobody else notices until it's already fallen. He laughed, said I sounded like his grandfather. I told him that was the nicest thing anybody'd said to me in about 8 months. While I was there, the coordinator mentioned something in passing. Her name was Ashlyn Boyer, a young woman. Mrs. Halloway had asked her to update the vendor point of contact on the master file, move all correspondence to Diane's cell number instead of mine. I told Ashlyn that would be fine for day of logistics, seating charts, timeline questions, that sort of thing. But the master contract stayed exactly as written, the one with the deposits and the cancellation terms, in my name, with my signature. And I'd appreciate her not changing that without my say-so. Ashlyn looked at the paperwork, confirmed it, said, "Of course, Mr. Copeland, no problem at all." She had no idea what she'd just confirmed for me. Neither did Diane. I guess she never once read past the first page of any contract with her son's name on it. She assumed somebody else would handle the details she found beneath her. An assistant, a vendor, a foolish old father-in-law. She was right about that part, as it turned out. 5 days out, Diane called a family meeting at her house, ostensibly to go over final logistics. Gary sat quiet the way Gary always sat quiet. Preston fidgeted with his phone. Callie sat beside me, closer than she'd sat in months, which I noticed and said nothing about. Diane went around the table thanking everyone who'd made this day possible. When she got to me, she paused just slightly. Said, "And Russell, thank you for, well, being here. The way you'd thank a neighbour for not mowing his lawn during your garden party. Not for the money, not for the deposits, not for a single dollar of the $18,400, still owed by nobody but me, just for being present, and implicitly for behaving." I thanked her back. I said it was my pleasure. I meant every word of it, though not, I suspect, the way she took it. It genuinely was my pleasure. Watching a woman build a whole evening's narrative around a debt she couldn't cover, and a father-in-law she decided to write out of the credit column entirely. Some men would have corrected her right there in front of everyone, and felt satisfied doing it. I have never once needed that kind of satisfaction. I've always preferred the kind that arrives later, quiet, and lands so much harder for having waited. 2 days before the wedding, the elder dignity story surfaced fully. No longer whispered in a kitchen, but spoken almost to my face. Diane cornered me by the coat closet after the rehearsal dinner. She used the gentlest voice I ever heard her use. She and Gary had talked, she said. They thought it might be wise. Just as a precaution, Russell. Nothing personal. A family friend of theirs happened to be an elder law attorney. He could take a quick look at my accounts before the wedding, just so nobody has to worry about anything unexpected down the road. She smiled the whole time she said it. She used the word precaution twice. I looked at her for a long moment before I answered. I thought about Marlene's dress in the cedar chest. I thought about $81,000 against a house Diane Holloway was still technically living in. I thought about a letter from Dr. Priya Ose, notarized and filed, sitting in Vera Nash's office not 4 miles from where we stood. I told Diane I appreciated her concern, and that my accounts were already very well looked after, by people who'd known me a great deal longer than she had. She smiled again, said she was glad to hear it, and walked off toward the kitchen to check on the caterer's final head count. I stood by that coat closet a moment longer, alone. And I understood, fully and finally, exactly what kind of wedding I was about to attend. Not my daughter's wedding. Not really. Not the way it should have been. A performance built on borrowed money, and a story about a confused old man, staged in a barn I'd paid to renovate the floor of. For an audience that had no idea whose name was on every single check. I did not raise my voice that night. I did not need to. I went home and I called Vera Nash one more time before the wedding, and I told her to have everything ready. Every contract, every cancellation clause, every wire transfer record going back 8 months. I told her I didn't know yet exactly which day I'd need it. I only knew, the way I've always known, that I would. Vera asked me to come by her office the morning before the wedding. One last time, before the whole thing started moving too fast for anybody to think straight. I almost didn't go. I had a florist to double check. A truck to load with folding chairs from the yard. 100 small errands a father runs the day before his only daughter marries. But Vera Nash has never once asked me to drop everything without a reason. Not in 19 years, so I went. She had a folder on her desk when I walked in. Plain manila. Nothing written on the tab but 2 words in her own handwriting. Callie, if needed. I asked her what it was. She told me to sit down first. 2 years earlier, I'd walked into this same office and told Vera I wanted my affairs put in order. It was not long after Marlene's first anniversary passed. I'd finally stopped waking up reaching for a woman who wasn't there. Not because I was sick. Not because anything was wrong. Burying a wife teaches a man the ground can move under you without warning. And I decided I'd rather be the one who moved it, on my own terms. I restructured the business. I moved the yard's deed, the house, the accounts, all of it, into a living trust. Callie named as sole beneficiary, no conditions. No shared ownership. No clause that gave any future spouse or in-law family so much as a foothold in a courtroom. I remembered doing it. I had simply forgotten how completely I'd done it. 2 years of living quiet and working steady will do that. Vera reminded me now, sitting across that same desk, that the trust was airtight. Nothing Diane Holloway could produce would touch $1 of what I'd built. No elder law attorney. No gentle family meeting. No whispered story about a confused old man. I'd built the legal floor under my own daughter, 2 full years before anybody ever thought to test it. You already did this, Russell, she said. You did it before you even knew you'd need to. I sat with that a long moment. I thought about how a man pours a foundation deep and thick, precisely because he can't see the day, years off, when the real weight finally lands on it. There's more, Vera said, and opened the folder. Inside was a second document I did not remember signing. My signature was plainly there, dated the same week as the trust. A letter addressed to Callie. I'd apparently dictated it to Vera in the raw early months of my grief, then set it aside and forgotten it entirely, the way you do things in grief. I read it standing at her window, the courthouse square outside, same as it's looked my whole life. It said, in my own words, that everything I'd built was hers, unconditionally. No matter who she married, no matter what anybody ever told her about her father losing his grip, because the one thing I'd never lose my grip on was loving her enough to make sure she never had to fight for what was already, plainly, hers. I hadn't remembered writing it. I remembered, reading it now, exactly why I had. Vera told me something else that morning, something I hadn't asked her to look into, but she'd done it anyway, the way she does. Patient and thorough. 19 years of knowing a client means you start protecting him before he thinks to ask. She'd had a paralegal quietly confirm it through public county filings. Diane Holloway's $81,000 loan was secured against her own house. The same house Diane had told 3 separate dinner guests in my hearing was paid off years ago. It wasn't a small detail, Ma. It was the whole shape of the woman, laid out in a filing cabinet at the county recorder's office. She'd spent 8 months building a story about my competence, all while quietly mortgaging her own house to pay for a wedding she was calling a gift. This isn't about an old man losing his grip anymore, if it ever was, Vera said. This is about a woman who needs everybody looking at you so nobody looks at her. I told Vera she was probably right. I'd suspected as much since the night in Diane's kitchen. But hearing her say it plainly changed something in me. It was backed by a county filing now, and a 2-year-old trust I'd built without fully remembering the reach of it. I walked into that office thinking I was defending myself against a story. You said to you. I walked out understanding I'd already built the answer to it, brick by brick, 2 years before the question was ever asked. What do you want to do with all this? Vera asked me. Before tomorrow. I told her I didn't want to do anything with it before tomorrow. Tomorrow was my daughter's wedding day. Whatever Diane Holloway was hiding, whatever she'd tell people at the barn door, none of it was going to touch what actually mattered about that day. What mattered was Callie, in her mother's dress, walking toward a life I hoped would be better than the one being staged around her. I told Vera to have the folder ready. I told her to have Walt Pruitt ready too. And I told her this: if anybody tried to make tomorrow about anything other than my daughter, I'd let them know, calmly, exactly whose name was on everything they were standing on. I drove home past the Kestrel barn on the way, slowed down without meaning to, looked at it sitting quiet in the afternoon light, white paint fresh, the new jack post doing its job under a floor that would hold 140 guests the next evening without so much as a creak. I'd paid to fix that floor. I'd paid for the floor itself, the paint, the lights strung across the rafters, the tent out back for the reception dinner. Every piece of it. And not one person walking into that barn tomorrow would think to wonder who'd made sure it would hold. That's the nature of a foundation. Nobody thanks you for it. They just walk on it, and if you've done the job right, they never even feel it under their feet. I went home that night and hung my one good suit on the closet door, took Marlene's dress out of the cedar chest one more time, hung it beside the suit so the two of them stood together in the dark, waiting for morning the way we'd waited together for so many mornings before this one. I read the note in the lining a final time. Walk her if you have to walk her alone. Just walk her. I had no idea standing in that closet exactly how literally I was about to have to take that instruction. I'd find out in the morning. Between that meeting with Vera and the wedding itself, there was one more evening I need to tell you about. It changed the shape of everything that came after it. It's the night I finally understood exactly how deep Diane Holloway's fear ran. 4 days before the wedding, Callie asked me to come to a small gathering at the Holloway's house. Just close family. Meant to be low-key, a chance for both sides to relax before the busy week ahead. I almost didn't go. I had chairs to load, a florist's final invoice to review, 100 small things a father does in the last days before he walks his daughter down an aisle. But Callie asked twice, gently, in a voice that told me she needed me there. So I put on a clean shirt and drove over. The house was smaller than I expected for a woman who talked as big as Diane did. Nice enough, kept up well, but nothing that matched the scale of the wedding she'd been describing at every dinner for 8 months. I noticed things, the way I always notice things, the way you notice a hairline crack in a wall before anybody else has looked twice at it, a watermark on the ceiling near the kitchen that hadn't been painted over, a car in the driveway 2 years past due for maintenance, a family with real money simply handles without thinking about it. Small things, true things. The kind of details a woman spending $81,000 borrowed dollars on optics has nothing left over to fix. Gary poured drinks quietly at a side table. I found myself standing near him a moment, away from the others. Asked him, plain, how the brokerage was doing these days. Just conversation, the way two fathers-in-law-to-be make conversation. Gary looked at me a long moment, longer than the question warranted. Then he said, quiet enough that only I could hear it. Some years are harder than they look from the outside, Russell. Then he handed me a drink and walked away before I could answer. I understood, standing in that kitchen, that Gary Holloway knew exactly how thin the ice under his own house had gotten. He simply lacked whatever it takes to say so out loud, to his wife, to his son, to anybody. Some men build their whole lives around never being the one who says the hard true thing first. I've never had that particular affliction. 52 years of pouring concrete teaches you the hard true thing is always better said early. While there's still time to reinforce what needs reinforcing. Later that evening, in the backyard, I overheard Diane on the phone again. Second time in a month, I'd caught her mid-conversation she thought was private. This time it wasn't about me. It was about the 2 commercial listings, the ones that had sat dark 14 months. And a phrase that stuck with me clean through to the wedding day itself. "If we don't move at least one of them before the end of the quarter," she said, low, urgent. I don't know how I'd cover the note. I stepped back inside before she saw me. I did not need to hear more. I already understood exactly what kind of pressure sat underneath every smile Diane Holloway had worn at every dinner for 8 straight months. I drove home that night thinking about pressure. Concrete can carry an enormous amount of weight, more than most people would ever guess, right up until the moment it can't. And when it fails, it very rarely fails slow. It fails all at once, at the exact point where the load exceeds what the structure was built to bear. Diane Holloway had built a life that looked solid from the road. It had been carrying more than it could hold for a lot longer than 14 months. The wedding, all that borrowed shine, was less a celebration than a last, desperate coat of paint. Paint over a crack that was only getting wider underneath it. I did not enjoy that thought. I want to say that plainly one more time because it would be easy, hearing this story, to think I took some pleasure in watching a woman's finances come apart. I did not. I took no pleasure in it at all. What I took was clarity, and clarity is a different thing entirely. Clarity told me one thing. Whatever happened at that wedding, whatever Diane tried, whatever story she told about my mind or my memory, the truth underneath her own house was going to matter a great deal more than the truth underneath mine. 3 days before the wedding, I did something I hadn't done in 4 years. I drove out to Wrestland to the maple tree, sat on the bench near Marlene's stone the better part of an hour, telling her, out loud, everything I'd learned that week. The loan, the listings, the kitchen conversation about my mind, the letter from Dr. Osei, notarized and filed. I told her I didn't know exactly how the wedding was going to go, only that I intended to walk our daughter down that aisle no matter what got said at the door. And if anybody tried to make her day about anything other than her, I'd handle it the same quiet way I'd handled every hard thing since the day we buried her. I don't believe in signs, not really, not the kind people talk about. But a breeze came through those maples while I sat there, strong enough to move a ribbon somebody had left on a nearby grave. And I let myself believe just for a minute that it meant something close to permission. That same afternoon, I stopped by the yard, my old construction yard on Sycamore Road, empty now except for 2 trucks and a shed full of tools I still oil every month, out of habit more than need. I keep an office there, small, plain, a metal desk Marlene bought me for our 10th anniversary. I sat at it and went through the wedding ledger one more time, the way I used to go through a job's final costs before signing off on a project. $18,400 total when you added every piece. $3,000 for the barn deposit, $4,200 for Millbrook's retainer, $6,000 for the open bar package, $2,800 for the entree upgrade Diane had requested without asking who'd cover the difference, $1,400 for the florist, $600 for the quartet's deposit, $400 for the tent's overnight rental. Numbers I'd tracked the way I've tracked every number that ever mattered to me. Clean, exact, ready for anyone who cared to look. I thought about the $81,000 Diane owed against her own house, a number 4.5 times the size of everything I'd quietly covered. And I thought about how she'd spent 8 months talking about generosity while carrying a debt that size in the dark. Some people build with their hands. Some people build with borrowed money and a good smile. Only one of those foundations holds up in a hard freeze. 2 days before the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner, the exchange I told you about earlier happened. The one about the commercial listings, her fork pausing over her plate. What I didn't tell you is what happened after I got home that night. Vera Nash called me. Late, past 10, which she never does unless something matters. Her paralegal had finished pulling every public filing tied to Diane Holloway's brokerage. The picture was worse than even Walt Pruitt's number had suggested. Diane hadn't just borrowed $81,000 against her house. She'd let both commercial listings' carrying costs run about $11,000 behind. Insurance, taxes, a small maintenance loan on the older property. Quietly, for the better part of a year, betting the wedding's optics would land her a buyer, or a favour from somebody impressed enough by the family's generosity to look past the numbers underneath it. I sat with that a long while after Vera hung up. $11,000 behind on carrying costs, $81,000 against the house, $18,400 of my own money quietly covering a wedding she was calling her gift. The whole shape of it laid out clean in front of me, the way a good surveyor's map lays out exactly where the ground is soft and where it'll hold. I did not sleep well that night. Not from fear, I want to be clear about that. From the particular restlessness of a man who knows a hard thing is coming and can't do anything more to prepare for it than he's already done. I got up before dawn the next morning and walked the yard in the grey early light, ran my hand along the old backhoe I'd bought new in 1994 and still keep running. And I told myself the thing I've told myself before every hard pour of my working life. The only thing left to do was let the concrete set the way it was always going to set, and trust the work I'd already put into the forms. The wedding was set for 6 in the evening. That meant the morning belonged to logistics. I'd promised Ashlyn Boyer I'd drop the dress at the Barnes bridal suite by 10, so the seamstress could do a final steam and pressing. I drove out with the cedar chest in the truck bed, wrapped in a moving blanket, like it was worth more than the truck itself. Which, in every way that mattered to me, it was. Callie met me at the bridal suite door. Already in her robe, hair half done, she looked more like the little girl who used to sit on my workbench handing me wrenches than the 30-year-old woman about to be married. She hugged me hard when she saw the chest. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Some things a father and daughter understand without a word passing between them. Marlene's dress coming off that truck bed was one of them. I was setting the chest down careful on the suite's dressing table when Diane walked in. Already dressed, hair set, moving with the brisk energy of a woman who has decided this day belongs to her. She saw the chest. She saw the dress inside it, ivory gone soft cream. And her face did something small and quick before she caught it and smoothed it back into a smile. "Oh, Russell," she said. "I thought we'd settled on the bellwether gown. It's already pressed and hanging in the closet there, see? It's lovely. And it really does complement the sage so much better than, well, an older piece." I told her calmly that we hadn't settled on anything of the sort. Callie had never agreed to a rental gown. And this dress had been waiting for this exact morning longer than Diane Halloway had known any of us existed. Diane's smile held, but her eyes moved to Callie, looking for backup. And for the first time in 8 months, it did not come. "I want to wear my mother's dress," Callie said. Quiet. Steady. The way I'd taught her once to say things that mattered. Flat and then hold the line. Diane opened her mouth to argue the palate again. Callie cut her off, gently but completely. "It's not a discussion, Diane. It's my mother's dress. I'm wearing it." Diane recovered fast the way she always did, smiling again, saying, of course, whatever made Callie happy. She just wanted everything to look cohesive for the photographs. She left the suite a moment later to check on the flowers, which I understood to mean she needed a minute alone, a minute to rebuild whatever story she'd been telling herself about how today would go. Callie helped me lift the dress from the chest. That's when we found it. Not the note in the lining, we both already knew about that one. A second piece of paper, folded small, tucked into a hidden seam pocket at the waist. Neither of us had ever noticed it in 4 years of opening that chest. Marlene's handwriting again, shakier, later. Written, I'd guess, in the last year of her life, when the cancer had already taken most of her strength, but none of her stubbornness. It read, "If anyone ever tells you this dress doesn't match the day, remember your father built every foundation in this town, by hand, and not one person ever asked him if the colour matched. Wear it anyway. Some things are right because they're true, not because they match." Callie cried reading it. I did too, and I am not ashamed to say it. Not after everything else I managed to keep flat and quiet that whole year. We stood there together in that bridal suite, holding a piece of paper her mother had hidden for a moment neither of them could have known would come. And for a minute none of the rest of it mattered at all. Not the wedding, not the loan, not the folder in Vera's office, not the elder dignity story Diane had been quietly constructing. Just Marlene, reaching across 4 years of silence to tell her daughter exactly what she needed to hear, on exactly the morning she needed to hear it. I left the suite not long after, to give Callie room to finish dressing. Walked the barn's main floor one more time, checking the jack post out of habit, the way you check a repair you're proud of. Everything held. Everything was solid. I had no way of knowing, walking that floor at 11 in the morning, with 3 hours left before the ceremony, what was coming. that the next time I stood at that barn's entrance, somebody would try to tell me I didn't belong inside it. Before I tell you what happened at the barn door, though, I want to walk you through the rest of that afternoon slowly. Every piece of it mattered. A man who's poured concrete his whole life learns something. The hours right before a big pour are never wasted hours, even when nothing looks like it's happening. After I left the bridal suite, I drove back into Cedar Falls to pick up my one good suit from the cleaners, an errand I'd put off longer than I should have. The way you put off small things when bigger things are circling. The woman at the counter is Norma Jean Kessler. She's pressed my suits the better part of 20 years since before Marlene passed. Handing over the garment bag, she asked whether I was nervous about walking Callie down the aisle. I told her I wasn't nervous about that part at all. She laughed, said that was the first time in 20 years she'd heard a father say that, without a beat of hesitation first. I drove back out toward the barn after that, taking the long way, past the old tally place where I'd learned to pour my first slab, past the county line where Marlene and I used to drive on Sunday afternoons early in our marriage, back when neither of us had 2 nickels to rub together, and we still thought that drive was the finest thing either of us had ever seen. 50 years changes a landscape. It does not change what a road like that means to a man, once it's had that kind of history poured into it. At the barn, I found Colette Farrow, the event manager, going over the final vendor checklist with a clipboard of her own. I asked her, plain, whether everything was set to run smooth that evening. She told me it was. Millbrook's crew was arriving at 4. The florist had already dropped the centerpieces. The string quartet would set up at 5:30 sharp. I mentioned, casual, that I wanted to confirm one more thing. The master vendor contract, the one bearing my signature and my account, was the document of record for any payment issue during service. She checked her file, confirmed it, told me it was standard practice for her to notify the client of record directly if anything ever flagged mid-event. I told her that was good practice. I did not tell her why I was asking. I want to be honest with you about something in this part of the story. Standing in that barn at 2 in the afternoon, I did not yet know exactly how the day was going to end. I suspected. A man who's read as many rooms and as many balance sheets as I have by 71 develops something close to instinct, the kind that tells you a storm's coming before the sky's fully clouded over. But I did not know for certain Diane would try to bar me from the ceremony. I did not know for certain the loan would surface the way it eventually did. I only knew the ground under this whole wedding had gone soft in more places than one. And soft ground, sooner or later, always tells you where it's soft, whether you go looking for it or not. I drove home once more before the ceremony, changed into my suit in the quiet of my own bedroom, the closet door open. Marlene's side of it empty now, 4 years, but never once emptied out. Her sweaters still hang there. I have never found the strength to give them away, and I've stopped pretending to myself that I ever will. I looked at myself in the mirror a long moment, an old man in a good suit. I thought about every job I'd ever finished, every slab that held, every roof that never once let water through. And I told myself that whatever happened in the next few hours, I had built enough true things in this life that one bad afternoon wasn't going to unbuild any of it. Then I drove back out to the barn. In my one good suit, Marlene's note folded against my chest where I could feel the shape of it. 90 minutes before the ceremony was set to begin. I want to go back a little further first, though. There's a dinner I haven't told you about yet. The rehearsal dinner 2 nights before. It matters more than it looked like it mattered at the time. Diane hosted it at a steakhouse in Waterloo. She'd chosen it specifically, she announced to the table, because it was where Preston's grandfather proposed to his grandmother 60 years ago this spring. A nice detail, a sentimental one. I sat 2 seats down from her, across from Gary. He spent most of the meal studying his water glass like it owed him money. Somewhere between the salads and the entrees, I asked Diane a question. Mild, curious, the tone of a man just making conversation. Whether the brokerage's new listings out on the highway were finally moving. The 2 commercial properties I'd heard about through the grapevine. I already knew the answer. I asked anyway. The way you tap a beam you already suspect is soft, just to hear the sound it makes. Diane's fork paused half an inch above her plate, just for a second. Then she said brightly that the market was just finding its footing again, that these things take patience, that she wasn't worried in the slightest. Gary's water glass got very interesting again. Preston laughed at something that wasn't funny, the way he does when the air in a room goes tight and he doesn't understand why. Callie looked at me, then at Diane, then back at her plate. She didn't know about the loan yet. She only knew, the way daughters know things, that something in the air had shifted, and that her father had somehow been the one to shift it. Without raising his voice even slightly, I let it go. I changed the subject to the seating chart, mild as anything, and the dinner rolled on the way dinners do. But I'd learned what I came to learn. Diane Halloway could hold a smile through a direct question about her own finances. She just couldn't hold it easy. And a woman who can't hold a smile easy when asked one plain question about her business is a woman, one plain question, away from a much harder night than a rehearsal dinner. Walking to my truck afterward, I thought about something Herb Talley told me my first year pouring concrete, more than 50 years back. Vera Nash's number was already 3 calls deep in my recent history that week. "Russell," he said, "any fool can pour a slab that looks flat the day you finish it. Only a real man checks it 2 years later, in February, after it's frozen and thawed a dozen times, to see if it still holds." Diane Halloway's whole life, I was starting to understand, was a slab poured to look flat for one afternoon. It had never once been checked for what it would do after a hard freeze. I did not enjoy learning that about her. I want to be honest about that much. There is no pleasure in watching a family come apart at the seams, even a family you never fully wanted to be part of. But there's a difference between not enjoying a thing and not being ready for it. And by the night of that rehearsal dinner, I was about as ready as a man can be. That same week, I sat down with a ledger one more time, the way I do before any big job closes out. I wrote every figure in a notebook I've kept since Marlene passed, plain columns, no shorthand. $18,400 total. Mine, paid quiet across 8 months. $81,000 against Diane's house, a number Walt Pruitt had no business telling me and every reason to. $11,000 more in deferred costs on those 2 dark listings. I added a 4th figure that week too, $600, wired quietly to Petey's crew as a bonus. A man who saves you from a lawsuit deserves more than a thank you. I keep numbers the way other men keep grudges. Cold, exact, filed where I can find them. Marlene used to tease me for it, said I loved a column of figures more than I loved gossip. And she wasn't wrong. A number doesn't lie to you the way a person can. It just sits there, plain, waiting for you to finally read it right. I closed that notebook the night before the wedding and told myself the same thing I told myself before every hard pour of my life. The numbers were already true. All that was left now was letting everyone else catch up to them. The morning of the wedding went the way I already told you it went. The dress, Callie's quiet refusal. The second note in the hidden seam. What I haven't told you yet is what happened 90 minutes before the ceremony. I drove back out to the barn in my one good suit, Marlene's note folded in my breast pocket, where I could feel the shape of it against my chest. And I found Ashlyn Boyer waiting for me at the entrance, a look on her face I'd never seen her wear before. She had a tablet in her hands, held a little too tight against her chest, the way you hold something you don't want to be holding. She started talking before I'd even reached the door, something about the family, about a decision, about wanting to avoid any unpleasantness before the ceremony started. I stood still and let her get through it, the way I let a man finish a bad excuse before I tell him the actual problem with his work. What it came down to, once she finally said it plain, was this. Diane and Gary had decided I should wait outside for the time being, for Callie's sake, so there's no scene. Not banned from the wedding entirely. She was careful to say that part twice. Just from the room. Just for now. Just until things had settled. Diane felt it would be less stressful for everyone if I took some air in the parking lot while the family finished getting the room ready. I asked her, calm as I've ever said anything, who exactly had made that decision. She said, Mrs. Halloway. I asked if Callie knew. Ashlyn's face told me the answer before her mouth did. Callie did not know. Nobody had told my daughter her own father was being asked to wait in a gravel lot, 90 minutes before she walked down the aisle, in her mother's dress. I want you to understand something about that moment. It's the moment this whole story turns on, and I don't want you picturing it wrong. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue with Ashlyn. She was 25 years old and clearly hated every second of the message she'd been handed to deliver. I did not push past her into the barn to confront Diane directly, though I'll admit the thought crossed my mind and left again just as fast. I looked at that young woman and I said, "All right, just that." One word. Then I said, "Thank you for telling me plain. That took some backbone." And I turned around and walked back to my truck, in my one good suit, with Marlene's note folded against my chest. And I felt something settle in me I can only describe as the exact opposite of panic. Calm. Complete. The calm of a man who's just watched the last piece of a puzzle click into a shape he already understood. I sat in the truck cab a moment before I did anything else. I looked at the barn through the windshield, white paint fresh, the jack post doing its job under a floor 140 guests were about to stand on, every board of it paid for by a man now sitting in a gravel lot. Sitting there because his presence had become inconvenient to a story somebody else was telling. I thought about Marlene. I thought about the note in my pocket. Walk her if you have to walk her alone. I understood, sitting there, that I very well might have to. And I understood something else, clearer than I'd understood anything in 8 months. This was never about avoiding a scene. Diane Halloway did not fear a scene. Diane Halloway feared a witness. She feared what I might say, standing in that room, in front of guests who still believed the Halloways had paid for every bit of this wedding, out of their own generous pocket. Getting me out of the building wasn't about protecting Callie's day. It was about protecting a story, protecting it from the one man alive who could unravel it with a single sentence. I picked up my phone. I called Vera Nash first. "It's time," I told her. She didn't ask what I meant. In 19 years, Vera Nash has never once needed a thing explained to her twice. She had the folder open already, she said, sitting on her desk. It had been sitting there since our meeting the day before, waiting. I told her to start the cancellations. Every vendor contract in my name, effective immediately. The caterer's final balance, the bar service's standing account, the florist's day of payment. All of it, frozen or redirected the moment she could get through to each company. Then I called Walt Pruitt at the bank. "Walt," I said, "freeze the wedding account. All of it. Effective now." He asked me one question only. "You sure, Russell?" I told him I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. He said he'd have it done inside the hour, and that he was sorry it had come to this. I told him not to be. A foundation that can't hold real weight was going to fail eventually, no matter who was standing on it. Better it happened now, in daylight than later, in the dark, when nobody was around to see whose name was actually on the paperwork. I sat in that truck a while longer after both calls, not moving, watching guests start to arrive across the lot, dressed in their good clothes, smiling, carrying gifts, walking toward a barn where the floor would hold just fine and the account behind it was already, quietly, coming apart at the seams. None of them knew yet. Callie didn't know yet. I had no plan at that point to make a scene of any kind. I'd simply, calmly stopped agreeing to carry something that was never mine to carry in the first place. I did not know, sitting there, exactly when the weight would land, or how loud it would be when it finally did. I only knew, the way I've always known these things, that it was coming, and that I would not be the one who had to raise his voice to make it arrive. Before Callie's call came, though, I sat in that truck a good while longer than 20 minutes. I want to tell you honestly what went through my mind in that stretch of time. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even really strategy. It was Marlene. I thought about the year we built the house on Sycamore Road. Callie was still small enough to ride on my shoulders across a job site. Marlene stood in what would become our kitchen, hands on her hips, telling the framing crew exactly where she wanted the window, over the sink. The one that would let her watch Callie play in the yard while she did dishes for the next 30 years. I remember the argument I had with the framer, whether that window's placement would compromise the load path through that wall. And I remembered how Marlene settled it, not by yielding, by asking me one question. "Russell, can you build it right and still give me my window?" I could. I always could if I thought about it long enough. That's the whole secret of my trade, and maybe the whole secret of my life. You can usually give people what they need, if you're willing to think a little harder about how to carry the weight. Sitting in that gravel lot, I understood I was doing the same math I'd done for that kitchen window. 40-some years later, in a different form entirely. Callie needed her wedding day. She needed her mother's dress. She needed, more than anything else, a father who didn't make a scene out of being disrespected. Scenes were never the Copeland way of solving anything. But the structure also needed to hold. Somewhere, someone had to bear the actual weight of the truth. And I understood, sitting there, that the someone was going to have to be me, same as it's always been me, quietly, for 52 years. A man named Dwayne Ostrander walked past my truck on his way into the reception, an old customer of mine from 20 years back whose barn foundation I'd poured myself. He spotted me sitting there in my suit and knocked on the window, friendly, asking if everything was all right. I told him I was just taking a minute before I went in. He said he understood. Weddings can wear a man out even before they start. And he walked on toward the barn, none the wiser about anything that had just happened at that door. I envied him that, briefly, his ignorance of the whole shape of the afternoon. Then I picked up my phone and made the 2 calls I've already told you about, to Vera Nash first, then to Walt Pruitt. Calm, deliberate. Each word chosen the way you choose a bolt size, exactly right for the load it's going to carry. I sat in that gravel lot for 20 minutes, maybe less after those calls ended, long enough for them to settle into something quiet in my chest instead of something urgent, long enough to watch 3 more cars of guests pull in and unload, laughing, adjusting ties. A little girl in a flower dress twirling once before her mother caught her hand. Then my phone rang. Callie! She'd found out. Ashlyn had told her. Or somebody had. The details never mattered much to me afterward. Only the fact of it. My daughter was standing somewhere inside that barn in her mother's dress, in tears, demanding to know why her father was sitting in a parking lot instead of walking through the front door. I answered on the second ring. I told her I was fine. I told her not to worry about me. Today belonged to her. And whatever had happened at the door, it changed nothing about how much I loved her, or how proud I was to walk her down that aisle. Then come inside, she said. Right now. I don't care what Diane wants. I want to be honest with you about something. I could have stayed in that truck out of pure stubborn pride. Let the whole day play out exactly as Diane had staged it, minus one father. Let the vendor cancellations do their work in silence. Hours later, once everyone had gone home, some men would have. I thought about it. For about as long as it takes concrete to start setting once you've mixed the water in. Which is to say, not very long at all. But Marlene's note was still folded against my chest. Walk her if you have to walk her alone. Just walk her. And my daughter was on the other end of a phone line, crying, asking her father to come inside. There was never really a decision to make. I told Callie I was on my way, and I got out of that truck and walked back across the gravel toward the barn doors. This time nobody stopped me. Ashlyn saw me coming and simply stepped aside, holding the door instead of blocking it. Whatever authority Diane thought she had over that entrance had already stopped existing. It stopped the moment I picked up my phone 20 minutes earlier. I walked Callie down that aisle 40 minutes later, her hand steady on my arm. Her mother's dress moving the way it was always meant to move, catching the last of the evening light through the barn's high windows. Preston stood waiting at the front, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. And somewhere in the second row, Diane sat with a smile fixed on her face. A smile that did not, if you knew what to look for, reach anywhere near her eyes. I said the traditional words when the minister asked who gives this woman to be married. I said them clear and steady, and I meant every syllable. And if my voice caught slightly on my late wife's name when I mentioned her, I don't believe a single person in that barn thought less of me for it. I sat down next to an empty chair we'd left for Marlene, the way we'd planned it 8 months back. A single white rose resting on the seat. And I watched my daughter marry a man I still believed, even then, was not a bad man himself, just a man who'd never once been taught to stand up straight in his own house. The ceremony itself went beautifully. I want that said plainly. Everything that came after it should never take away from those 20 minutes. Callie was radiant. The vows were her own words, honest and a little funny. The kind of vows that make a room go soft all at once. When the minister pronounced them married, the whole barn stood and clapped. And for one clean minute, none of the rest of it mattered at all. Not the loan, not the folder, not the ban at the door. Then the room moved toward the reception tent out back, string lights coming on overhead as the evening settled in. I walked with the rest of the guests, calm, steady, in my one good suit, toward a dinner I already knew was not going to end the way anybody in that tent expected it to. There was a cocktail hour first out on the barn's side lawn, string lights not yet lit against the last of the daylight. a bar cart pouring drinks from the same open bar package Millbrook had built into their invoice. I walked that lawn slow, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. Guests who had no idea what had happened at the front door an hour earlier. No idea that 2 phone calls had already been placed. 2 calls that would, before the night was through, change the shape of everything they thought they understood about this wedding. Walt Pruitt's sister found me near the bar, an old friend of Marlene's named Joan Ellery. She told me how radiant Callie looked, how proud Marlene would have been, how she still thought about my late wife every time she drove past the peony beds along our old fence line. The new owners, thank goodness, had kept them exactly as Marlene planted them. I thanked her. I meant it. There's a particular kind of grace in strangers, and half-strangers who remember you're dead the way you remember them yourself, without being asked to. Joan Ellery had always had that grace in abundance. Preston found me a few minutes later, nervous still, his tie slightly crooked. He thanked me, awkwardly, for walking Callie down the aisle, even after everything with the door thing earlier. I told him it wasn't his doing. I didn't hold a son responsible for a mother's decisions, not unless the son had made them his own. He looked relieved to hear it, and for a moment I saw, underneath the borrowed certainty Diane had raised him with, a young man who genuinely loved my daughter, a young man with no idea how deep the water around his own family had gotten. I patted his shoulder once and told him to go find his bride before she wondered where he'd gone. Vera Nash arrived at the cocktail hour a few minutes after I did, her husband beside her, both dressed for a wedding, both carrying, I knew, considerably more than a gift card in mind. She found me near the edge of the lawn and asked, quiet, whether I wanted her to intervene the moment the notice landed, or let it play out on its own first. I told her to let it play. I'd built this whole evening on patience so far. I saw no reason to abandon it in the last hour. The barn's doors opened for dinner service a little after 7. Guests filing in past the reinforced mezzanine floor I'd quietly fixed 3 weeks earlier. None of them aware that the floor holding their feet up that evening had very nearly failed before a single vow was spoken. I found my seat near the front, beside Vera and her husband, watched Callie and Preston take the head table to applause. Callie luminous in her mother's dress, catching the last long light through the barn's high windows. Exactly the way I'd imagined she would, since the day Marlene first tailored that neckline. Decades before either of us knew there'd be a daughter to wear it. The tent held 140 guests comfortably, round tables draped in the sage and cream Diane had insisted on for 8 straight months. Votive candles glowing along a head table built from lumber I'd milled myself 2 summers back. Milled it for a project that never got used, until, apparently, it did. I sat near the front at a table with Vera Nash and her husband. I'd invited them myself, quietly, weeks earlier. Never told anybody why a family lawyer needed to be at a wedding reception. Nobody had questioned it. Nobody ever questions where the concrete man's lawyer sits. Callie's toast came first before Diane's. Her own words, warm and a little funny. She thanked her mother's memory for the dress she wore, and she thanked me, her father, for teaching her that quiet people carry the most weight in a room. A line that landed harder on me than I let show. Preston's best man spoke next, a college friend with more nerves than material. The tent laughed kindly through his stumbling toast, the way good crowds do for a nervous young man trying his best. Then came the parent toasts, Gary first. Brief, a few sentences about family and blessings. They carried none of his wife's polish and, I suspected, a good deal more honesty for the lack of it. He sat down quickly, relieved to be finished, and did not meet my eyes on the way down. I want to tell you about the minutes right before Diane stood up. They matter, small as they were. My phone buzzed once against my leg under the table. A text from Vera. 3 words only. Ready when you are. I did not answer it yet. I looked instead at Callie, laughing at something her new husband whispered. One hand resting on the tablecloth near a votive candle. Her mother's dress catching the light exactly the way I'd hoped it would when I hung it beside my suit the night before. I thought, watching her, that whatever came next, I wanted this image of her. Exactly like this. The one that stayed with me longest from that whole evening. I thought too, in that quiet stretch, about the note in the cedar chest, the one Marlene had hidden for a moment neither of us could have predicted. Some things are right because they're true, not because they match. I understood, sitting at that table with my phone buzzing gently against my leg. One thing, The evening was about to stop matching Diane's careful palette, in a way considerably larger than a wedding dress. And it was, all the same, still going to end up true. The servers cleared the soup bowls, the entree plates went out, the beef, the vegetarian option, and I watched Diane dab her mouth with her napkin, set it down, and reach for her wineglass one more time. The particular gesture of a woman gathering herself before she performs a role she's performed 100 times, at other people's closings, other people's open houses, other people's celebrations, where the truth mattered a good deal less than the mood in the room. I already understood, before she stood, more or less exactly what she was going to say. I did not know the precise words yet, but I knew the shape of the story. I'd heard its opening line already, whispered in a kitchen weeks before. I simply had not expected her to say it out loud, to 140 people, at her own son's wedding, with the accounts already flagged and the notice already quietly working its way toward the barn's event manager. The caterer was a company out of Cedar Rapids called Millbrook Provisions. They'd built a menu around a $6,000 open bar package and a $4,200 plated dinner service. Both paid, like everything else that day, from an account with my name on the paperwork, and Diane's name on the toast she was about to give. Servers moved between tables with the first course, a squash soup Callie had picked out herself, and I watched Diane stand at the head table, tap her glass with a spoon, and prepare to speak. "I just want to say," she began, her voice carrying easy across the tent, "how proud Gary and I are to have helped make this beautiful day possible for these two. It's the way a voice carries when a woman has given 100 toasts in her real estate career and knows exactly how to hold a room." She gestured at the tent, the lights, the linens, the whole staged and gleaming evening. When you love your children, you give them everything you can. That's what tonight is. Our gift. I sat very still. Vera Nash, beside me, did not look up from her soup, though I caught the faint movement at the corner of her mouth. It told me she was working just as hard as I was not to react. Somewhere near the back of the tent, my phone buzzed once in my jacket pocket. I did not check it yet. I already had a good idea what it said. Diane finished her toast with a line about family and blessings, and the two families becoming one. The tent applauded, warm and unaware. The servers kept moving, refilling glasses from a bar account that had stopped accepting further draws against it 11 minutes earlier. Not one person holding one of those glasses knew it. That's when the first small crack showed. A bartender, a young man in a black vest, leaned toward the barn's event manager near the service entrance, phone in hand, a look of confusion on his face that the manager mirrored a second later. I watched them from my table unhurried, the way you watch weather roll in from a distance, knowing exactly how long you've got before it reaches you. The soup course cleared, the entrees came out, beef and a vegetarian option, another $2,800 of Millbrook's invoice. And somewhere around the time the plates were being set down, I saw Ashlyn Boyer cross the tent floor toward Diane, leaning down to speak quietly near her ear. Diane's face did the same small, quick thing it had done that morning in the bridal suite. Then she smoothed it back into her hosting smile and waved Ashlyn off with a gesture that said later, not now. It was not going to be later. I had made certain of that, 20 minutes past 6 that evening, sitting in a gravel lot in my one good suit. I want you to understand, watching all this unfold, that I felt no triumph yet. I felt something closer to what I used to feel, checking a form before a pour. Watching the numbers add up the way I already knew they would, waiting only for the concrete itself to confirm what the math had already told me. I had built this moment the same patient way I'd built everything else in my life, not out of anger, out of arithmetic. I looked once across the tent at Callie, radiant, laughing at something Preston had whispered to her, entirely unaware that the floor under her wedding reception was about to make a sound nobody could ignore. I felt a pang of something then, not regret, never regret, just a father's plain wish that his daughter's night could stay exactly as beautiful as it looked in that moment a while longer. It didn't. Millbrook Provisions had a policy, spelled out clean in the contract I'd signed 8 months earlier. A clause I never once thought I'd need to invoke. Any account showing a failed final payment authorization required the on-site manager to notify the client of record immediately, in person. Before service could continue past the entree course, the client of record was me, but that notification and everything that followed from it was still a little while off yet. There's a piece I need to back up and tell you first. It explains why the freeze landed exactly when it did, instead of an hour earlier or an hour later. When I called Vera Nash from that gravel lot, I told her to start the cancellations. But I told her one thing more. Hold the caterer and the bar service until the entree course cleared. Only then let the failed authorization notice go through. I did not want my daughter's dinner interrupted mid-course, plates half-eaten, servers frozen mid-stride. I wanted it to land clean, at a natural break. The way you time a controlled demolition, so the building comes down exactly where you've planned for it to fall, and nowhere else. Vera understood immediately. She always does. She told Walt Pruitt the same thing. Hold the account freeze notification until the entree course cleared, then let it process. It was, I'll admit now, the one piece of the whole afternoon I did plan with something closer to intent than pure calm reaction. I did not want a scene at my daughter's wedding. I wanted the truth to arrive at dessert. Quiet and undeniable. The way water finds the one soft spot in a foundation and simply, patiently gets in. While the entree plates were being cleared, and before the second course notice reached the barn's event manager, Diane took the floor again. She called it one more little toast. This one aimed, I understood instantly, directly at establishing a narrative before anything else could establish one for her. She'd clearly caught wind that something was moving, in a direction she didn't control. Through Ashlyn, maybe, or through the bartender's confusion. And Diane Halloway, whatever else you want to say about her, has never once in her life waited passively for bad news to arrive. Before dessert, she said, glass raised, voice pitched to Carrie. I want to say one more thing. About family, and about how sometimes the people who love you most show it in quiet ways you don't always see right away. She looked briefly directly at me. Russell here, he's had a hard year. He's not always been himself lately. And Gary and I just want everyone to know, whatever anybody hears tonight, whatever gets said, we love him. And we're going to make sure he's taken care of. The tent went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when it senses something happening beneath the words being spoken. Without yet understanding what, Callie's face 3 tables over went pale. Preston looked at his mother like he'd never seen her before. Vera Nash, beside me, set her wineglass down without a sound. And I felt her posture shift into something I recognised, something from 19 years of watching her prepare to speak in rooms exactly like this one. A murmur moved through the tables nearest the head table. Low, uncertain, the sound a room makes when it's trying to decide whether it just heard something kind or something else entirely. An older woman 2 tables over, somebody's great aunt, leaned toward her husband and whispered a question I couldn't make out. Joan Ellery, closer to me, caught my eye across the tent. Her expression told me she, at least, had heard exactly what Diane meant, and did not care for it one bit. Callie half rose from her chair, colour returning to her face as something sharper than shock. I saw her mouth start to form my name, saw her getting ready to defend me, the way I'd watched her try to defend me in smaller rooms for 8 straight months. I gave her the smallest shake of my head. Barely emotion at all, the kind of signal only a daughter who's watched her father read a room her whole life would even catch. Not yet, that shake said. Let me. She sat back down, uncertain, watching me instead of her mother-in-law. Preston reached for her hand under the table. Gary Halloway had gone very still beside his wife, staring at the tablecloth again. And I understood, watching him, that whatever Diane had just done, she had done it without warning even her own husband first. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I looked at Diane Halloway across that tent, in front of 140 guests, string lights glowing overhead on a floor I paid to reinforce, so it wouldn't fail under exactly this kind of weight. And I understood, with total clarity, that she had just done the one thing I hadn't fully planned for. She had said the quiet part out loud, the elder dignity story, in public, to an entire room, thinking it would land as compassion, and land first. Before whatever she suspected was coming could land as anything else. She was wrong about that too, same as she'd been wrong about the beam, same as she'd been wrong about the vendor contracts. A story told a beat too late, in front of the wrong audience, does not protect you. It only tells everyone exactly where to look. I stood up then, slowly, no hurry in it. I set my napkin on the table, the way you set down a tool when a job is finished. Not thrown, just placed, deliberate. I did not shout. I have never once shouted in my life, and I was not going to start at my own daughter's wedding. Diane, I said, and my voice carried across that tent, easier than I expected, plain and even, the way it carries when a man has spent 50 years giving instructions on job sites, where shouting only ever got somebody hurt. I appreciate the concern. I really do. But I saw my doctor 6 weeks ago. Clean bill of health, same as every year for 11 years. My lawyers got the letter, notarized, filed, dated before any of this wedding planning ever started. I'm not confused, and I'm not forgetful. I read every contract I sign, every single one. I let that sit a moment. Then I said the rest of it, still flat, still quiet, the way you'd read a level off a beam. Every vendor contract for tonight has my name on it. The caterer, the bar, the florist, the barn rental itself. My name, and only my name. Not because I wanted the credit, because nobody else offered to sign for it. $18,400. Paid quietly over 8 months. While I heard this called a Halloway family gift more times than I can count tonight alone, Diane's smile had gone somewhere else entirely by then. Gary had stopped studying his water glass and started studying the tablecloth instead. I could feel the whole tent leaning in. 140 people suddenly very interested in a conversation they'd assumed 30 seconds earlier was going to be a sweet toast about family. I'm not telling you this to embarrass anybody, I said, and I meant it. Though I understood, even as I said it, that embarrassment was coming regardless of my intentions. I'm telling you because my daughter deserves a wedding built on the truth, same as any foundation deserves to be built on solid ground. And the truth is, this evening was paid for by a 71-year-old man, a man you tried to keep out of the building an hour and a half ago, to avoid, in your words, a scene. A server appeared at the edge of the head table just then, the barn's event manager a step behind her, both of them wearing the particular, careful expression of people sent to deliver news nobody wants to hear. In front of an audience nobody expected to be watching, the manager was a woman named Colette Farrow, who'd run that barn's events for 6 years. She leaned down and spoke, not quite quiet enough, to Diane first. Diane's name was on the day of paperwork, even if it wasn't on the master contract. Mrs. Halloway, she said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Millbrook's system just flagged a failed authorization on the final catering payment, and the bar service is showing the same. We're required to notify the account holder before we can continue dessert service. The account is showing Russell Copeland as the client of record. The tent had gone fully silent by then, 140 people holding their breath in unison, string lights humming faintly overhead. And I watched Diane Halloway's face do something I will remember for the rest of my life. Not anger, not even embarrassment, not fully, not yet. Fear. Plain, undisguised fear. The same fear I imagined she'd been carrying quietly for 14 months. Over 2 empty commercial listings and an $81,000 loan against her own house. Finally arriving somewhere she could no longer keep it hidden, behind a smile. There's clearly been some kind of mistake, Diane said. Too fast, too bright. Russell, surely you didn't... I did, I said. 2 words. Flat. Final. You asked me to wait in a parking lot 90 minutes before my daughter's wedding, Diane. So I did what I always do when somebody tells me I'm not needed to hold something up. I stopped holding it up. Colette Farrow, the event manager still standing at the head table with her clipboard, cleared her throat gently. The way people do when they have one more piece of unwelcome information to deliver, and no good way to soften it further. Ma'am, she said to Diane, per the contract terms, when the account of record fails authorization, the venue is required to bill the secondary contact directly for any balance due. To keep the event running, that's listed as Diane Halloway. The remaining balance across catering, bar, and the venue's own overage fees comes to just under $9,000, due tonight for service to continue. The tent had gone so quiet by then, you could hear the string lights humming overhead. Diane opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. There's clearly a billing error. I'll call the office Monday, Mrs. Halloway, Colette said. Not unkindly, but plainly. The way a woman says a thing she's required to say, regardless of how it lands. I do need a form of payment tonight, or dessert service can't continue and the bar closes for the remainder of the evening. It was Walt Pruitt who spoke next. And I want to tell you I hadn't planned for Walt to be there at all. Hadn't even known he'd been invited. Not until I saw him rise from a table near the back, where he'd been sitting quietly all evening, a wedding gift for Callie tucked under his arm. Walt Pruitt has run my accounts, and half this county's, for over 30 years. There is very little that happens at First Cedar Bank that Walt doesn't eventually hear about, one way or another. Diane, he said, walking toward the head table, gentle as anything. I think everybody here already knows you took a personal loan against your house a while back. $81,000. I'm not saying that to embarrass you. I'm saying it because I think it's time somebody, besides Russell, carried a little of what's been sitting on your shoulders all these months. He said it kindly. He said it plainly. And he said it in front of 140 people, half of whom I watched turn in that instant, from confused to quietly, finally, understanding. Diane's composure did not shatter all at once. It went the way a wall goes when the load finally exceeds what it can bear. A long crack first, silent, and then altogether, everything behind it. She sat down slowly in her chair, Gary's hand finding hers for the first time all evening. And I watched a woman who had spent 8 months building a story about a confused old man discover the truth. In front of everyone she'd built that story for. The confusion had never once belonged to me. "I'm sorry," she said finally, quiet now, the brightness gone entirely out of her voice. I didn't know how else to. I didn't want anybody to know we were. I just wanted one day where it looked like we'd given her everything. I stood up again, this time slow, and I want you to understand, I felt no triumph in that moment either. Same as I hadn't felt any watching the notice arrive, I felt something closer to grief. The particular grief of watching a woman's whole architecture of pride come down at once, in public, at her own son's wedding, because she had never once learned the difference between looking solid and being solid. "Diane," I said, and my voice was gentler now than it had been a minute earlier. "I've poured concrete for 52 years. You know what I learned the very first year I did it? You can't fake a foundation. Doesn't matter how good the paint looks on top. If the ground underneath isn't true, sooner or later, the weather finds it." I looked at her a long moment. I would have helped you. All you had to do was tell me the truth, instead of telling everyone a story about me. Nobody in that tent said a word for a long moment. Then Callie stood up, crossed the space between the head table and where her mother-in-law sat, and did something I did not expect and could not have scripted if I'd tried. She knelt beside Diane's chair, took her hand, and said, quiet enough that only the nearest tables heard it, "We could have carried this together. All of us. That's what family's supposed to be for." Diane cried then, properly. The first honest thing I believe I ever saw her do. Callie stayed beside her a long moment. Ça va. Then she stood and returned at last to my table, to me, and put her hand on my shoulder the way her mother used to. Colette Farrow, practical as ever, even in the middle of somebody else's unravelling, asked quietly whether service could continue. I told her yes. I told her to put the remaining balance, the $9,000, on my account after all. One more time. Not because I owed it, because my daughter's wedding was not going to end with an unpaid bar tab. Whatever else had been said that night. Vera Nash caught my eye across the table and gave the smallest nod, the kind that told me she agreed completely, and that she'd already have the paperwork drafted by Monday. Paperwork making very clear, on the record, exactly whose generosity this had been, start to finish, 8 months running. Dessert came out 20 minutes later. Kate, Callie and Preston cut together to polite, uncertain applause, the tent slowly finding its footing again, the way rooms do after something true has happened in them. Diane didn't give another toast that night. She sat quiet beside Gary, who held her hand the whole rest of the evening. In a way I don't believe he'd managed in longer than either of them would admit. The procedural aftermath, the part that unfolds slower than a single evening, started the following Monday, exactly as Vera Nash said it would. The vendor contracts reverted, in writing, to their original terms. That meant the caterer's remaining invoice, the bar's final settlement, and a small overage fee from the barn itself, all came due to the account holder of record. By contract, that meant Diane and Gary Halloway going forward. Not me, effective the morning after the wedding. Diane's brokerage was already carrying an $81,000 note and $11,000 of deferred carrying costs on 2 dark listings. Now it absorbed another $9,200 of wedding balance, a balance she could no longer quietly hope somebody else would cover. Walt Pruitt told me, a few weeks later, over coffee at the same bank counter where he'd first told me about the loan. Diane had come in herself, alone, no appointment, and asked him plainly what her real options were. He walked her through a restructuring plan. Patient. The way Walt is patient with everyone, whether they deserve it or not. One of the 2 commercial listings sold within 6 weeks. At a loss, but not a catastrophic one. Enough to bring the loan current and buy her breathing room she hadn't had in 14 months. She would be paying the rest down carefully, honestly, for years. Walt said she seemed, for the first time since he'd known the family, like a woman finally building on ground she could actually see the shape of. The second listing took longer. A buyer finally came through in the fall, a young couple wanting to open a hardware store, and Diane sold it at a fair price instead of the inflated one she'd been chasing for over a year. I heard secondhand that she'd cried in Walt's office signing the closing papers. Not from loss, Walt told me, from relief. A woman who spent a decade performing certainty finally gets to stop, and it comes out of her sideways, in a bank office, over a stack of papers nobody else in that room understood the weight of. She and Gary downsized that winter, sold the big house with the watermark ceiling, moved into something smaller, and honestly priced 2 streets over. Diane still sells real estate. She's good at it, genuinely, when she isn't hiding something underneath the listing. I've seen her yard signs go up around town since, and I notice now that she prices them plain and sells them fast. No performance in it anymore. Just a woman doing an honest job the honest way. I don't know if I'd call what happened to Diane a punishment. I've thought about that a great deal since the wedding. Turning it over the way you turn a beam over, looking for the crack you already know is there. I think what happened to her was closer to a foundation finally getting inspected. Hard and public and long overdue. But once it happened, once the crack was found and the load was properly redistributed, the structure that was left standing was actually sound. Sounder, maybe, than the one she'd been propping up with borrowed shine for years. That's the thing about concrete, and about people too, I've come to believe. You can't skip the inspection forever. Sooner or later, the weight finds every soft place you never fixed. The only real choice you get is whether you find it yourself, quietly, on your own schedule, or whether it finds you, loud in front of everyone, at the worst possible moment. Diane got the second kind. I got the first kind, 20 years back, the year I restructured everything after Marlene passed. I don't say that to boast, I say it because I understand now, better than I did even a year ago, that the difference between us was never virtue. It was just which kind of inspection came first. Gary Halloway called me himself about a month after the wedding. That surprised me more than almost anything else that whole year. He asked if I'd consider having coffee sometime, just the 2 of us. No agenda. We met at a diner on the edge of town. He told me plain that he'd known about the loan for over a year. He'd gone along with the wedding's optics because he didn't know how to be the one who finally said no to his own wife. Not after 30 years of not saying it. He wasn't proud of that. He said watching me stand up quietly in that tent, no shouting, no cruelty, had shown him something. Something about what strength actually looked like. Something he'd never quite learned from any other man in his life. I told him it was never too late to learn to say the hard, true thing, early. He said he was going to try. Preston and Callie settled into married life the way young couples do, slow at first, finding their footing. Preston asked me, a few weeks after the wedding, if I'd teach him a few basics around a job site. He wanted to understand, really understand, the trade that had built the floor he got married standing on. I took him out to the yard on a Saturday, showed him how to read a level, how to feel, forgive in a beam the way I'd felt it in that mezzanine floor. Months back, he was clumsy at first, everybody is. But he came back the next Saturday too, and the one after that. And somewhere in those quiet mornings, teaching a young man to mix concrete properly, I found something close to the sun the sign out on Sycamore Road had never actually needed, until, in its own slow way, it finally got one. Callie came to me alone about 2 months after the wedding. She asked the question I think she'd been carrying since the barn door closed against me. She asked if I could forgive Diane. I told her forgiveness wasn't really mine to give or withhold, not for something that had mostly happened to me in passing. A parking lot, an hour and a half of my time. What I could offer, and what I did offer, freely, was patience. The same patience I'd built my whole working life on. Diane and I would never be close, I told her. But I would sit at the same table as her, for Callie's sake. And I would treat her with the plain decency I tried to treat everyone with, provided she kept building, honestly going forward, instead of on borrowed shine. Callie herself, though, that was a different kind of reconciliation, one that needed no conditions at all. My daughter had never actually wronged me. She'd only gotten caught for a while in a current stronger than she knew how to swim against. She started coming by the house again on Sundays, the way she used to before the engagement, bringing Preston sometimes. And we'd sit on the porch the way Marlene and I used to sit, and talk about nothing important. Which is, I've come to understand at 71 years old, usually the most important kind of talking there is. One Sunday in early autumn, Callie brought over a box of her mother's recipe cards. She'd finally worked up the courage to sort through them. We went page by page at the kitchen table. Marlene's handwriting slanted the same familiar way across every single one. A pot roast recipe had a note in the margin that just said, "More garlic than this, always." Callie laughed at that note longer than I expected her to. Then she cried briefly, the good kind of crying, the kind that clears something out instead of hollowing it further. I sat with her through both. She asked me that afternoon whether I thought her mother would have liked Preston. In the end, once you got past all the trouble his family had caused, I told her the truth. I told her Marlene judged people by what they did when nobody was checking, not by what family they came from. I told her Preston, given time and the right example, seemed like a man capable of learning that lesson properly. I told her I intended to keep teaching him, out at the yard for as long as he kept showing up on Saturdays. He kept showing up. By the following spring, Preston could read a level, almost as well as Petey could. He'd started asking sharper questions too, the kind that told me he was thinking about the work instead of just performing interest in it for my benefit. I gave him an old level one Saturday, the same one Herb Talley gave me my first year in the trade. Told him it was his now. Told him to take care of it the way I'd taken care of it for 52 years. He didn't say much. He just held it a long moment, the way you hold something heavier than its actual weight, and nodded. Callie found me in the yard not long after, watching the two of us from the gate. She told me quiet that she thought her mother would have loved watching this exact scene unfold. An old man and a young one, learning the same trade the same slow way, over the same kind of Saturday mornings. I told her I thought so too. I told her some things get passed down whether or not they're written into any will, and that the level in Preston's hands mattered more to me, at 71, than anything a lawyer could have drafted. I want to tell you about one more evening before I close this out. It matters more to me than almost anything else in this whole story. About 6 weeks after the wedding, Callie asked if she could bring the dress back out to the yard. For photographs. Just the two of us. No wedding party, no barn, no palette to worry about matching. I said yes before she finished asking. She stood in that dress on the same concrete lot I poured with my own hands the year Callie was born. String lights I'd hung for the occasion glowing overhead. I stood beside her in my one good suit one more time, and a photographer friend of Vera's took a handful of pictures that mean more to me now than any photograph taken at the actual wedding. In one of them, Callie's holding the note from the cedar chest. The first one, the one that's been waiting since before she could walk. Walk her if you have to walk her alone. Just walk her. We framed that photograph together the following week. A plain wood frame Callie picked out herself. Nothing fancy. The kind of frame that doesn't try to compete with what's actually inside it. It sits on my mantel now, next to Marlene's picture from our own wedding day, 43 years apart, two brides in the same dress, one waiting the whole time for the other. I look at both photographs most evenings before I turn in. I don't say much when I look. I don't need to. Some things speak for themselves once you finally let them. I told her that evening. Quiet. The string lights humming faintly, overhead the way they'd hummed at the barn months earlier. I told her I never once raised my voice through any of it. Not at the door. Not in that tent. Not once. The only tools I ever really had, my whole working life, were patience and a level and the plain truth, laid out flat where anybody willing to look could see it clearly. Callie asked me that same evening whether I'd do anything differently, given the chance to live those 8 months over again. I thought about it a long while before I answered her, the way I think about anything worth answering honestly. I told her no. Not one phone call. Not one contract I signed quietly in my own name. Not one quiet minute in that gravel lot, waiting for the weight to find its own way down. A man builds a life out of the choices nobody sees him make. And I've never once regretted a foundation, just because somebody later complained about how it held. I still go out to that yard most mornings, even now, even with the business mostly quiet these days. A man who's spent 52 years checking whether the ground holds doesn't stop checking just because nobody's building on it anymore. I check the old sign sometimes too, Copeland and Sons, faded some now. And I think about how it never once needed changing. Not for the reason I used to think. Not because there was no sun to put on it, but because a name only ever needs to mean what you build under it. And mine always has. Petey, the young site manager from the barn, calls me sometimes now. When he hits a problem on a job, he can't quite puzzle out on his own. Last month it was a retaining wall out past Route 9 that kept showing hairline cracks nobody could explain. I drove out on a Saturday, walked the site the way I've walked 1,000 sites, found the drainage was routed wrong, water pooling right where the wall's footing needed to stay dry. Small thing. Easy fix once you know where to look. Petey asked me, packing up his tools, why I still bothered driving out for jobs that weren't mine anymore. Jobs that weren't going to pay me a dime. I told him the truth. I told him a man doesn't stop caring whether the ground holds just because he stopped getting paid to check it. I told him that's the whole difference between a job and a life's work. A job ends when the check clears. A life's work just keeps needing you. Quietly. Long after anybody's still writing the checks. He didn't say much back. He just nodded, the way a young man nods when an old one's said something he'll understand better in about 30 years. I like Petey. He reminds me of myself at that age. Before I knew anything, before Marlene, before Callie, before any of the weight I'd end up learning to carry. Joan Ellery still drives past our old fence line most weeks, still tells me the peonies are holding up fine under new owners who, credit to them, never once thought to tear out what Marlene planted. I go by myself sometimes too. Park across the street just to look. I don't need to walk the yard. I just need to know the flowers are still there, still blooming every spring the way she planned for them to. Long after she stopped being here to see it herself. That's the last thing I want you to understand about all of this, if you understand nothing else. None of it, not one part, was ever really about a barn door, or a dress, or even the $18,400 I paid without complaint for 8 straight months. It was about a promise I made a woman 43 years ago, to build things that hold, and to raise a daughter who'd know the difference between a foundation and a coat of paint, no matter who ever tried to convince her otherwise. Vera Nash retired last spring, finally after 20 years of holding my paperwork the way another man might hold a rifle, ready but never itching to use it. She handed my file to a younger associate in her firm, a careful woman named Priscilla Boone, and made her promise, in my hearing, to read every single page before she ever signed anything on my behalf. I liked that. I liked that the habit outlives the person who taught it to you, same as a good foundation. Outlives the crew that poured it. Walt Pruitt is still at First Cedar Bank, still threatening to retire, and still showing up every Monday morning like clockwork. He tells me sometimes that Diane Halloway comes in now and again, just to talk, nothing official, and that she's paying the restructured loan down faster than the schedule requires. He says she asked about me once, whether I was doing all right, and he told her the truth, that I was doing just fine, same as I always have. She didn't ask anything more than that. I didn't expect her to. I think about the wedding less than you'd guess, given how much of this story belonged to that single evening. Mostly I think about the ordinary Sundays that came after it. Callie at my kitchen table, Preston learning to read a beam, the porch light on while the evening goes soft and blue over the yard. That's the part nobody puts in a toast. That's the part that actually matters, once the string lights come down and the folding chairs go back in the truck. I built this whole life with my own 2 hands, one paw at a time, and I intend to keep checking the load for as long as I'm able, whether anyone's paying me to or not. Some things you don't retire from. You just keep doing them quietly, for their own sake, long after the world stopped asking you to. My name is Russell Copeland. I am 71 years old. I did not raise my voice at any of it. I only ever checked the load, told the truth, and let the weight fall exactly where it was always going to fall. Some men call that patience. I've just always called it building things right the first time, so you never have to explain yourself twice.